So I'm going to share screen. I'm going to talk about Sir Oswald Mosley. He's really quite an interesting character. He was born in 1896 to a very well-known and historical family who are also responsible for Mosley Street in Manchester through his ancestor, Sir Nicholas Mosley, who became Lord of the Manor of Manchester in 1596. So he goes back a long way. Well, we all use the term fascist quite a lot, I think, don't we? So I just thought I'd look up what exactly does it mean? Though it's a bit difficult because Ian Kershaw said, trying to define fascism is like trying to nail jelly to the wall. These are the sort of things that occur with fascist states. It's nation over the individual, it's authoritarian, it's nationalist, and it opposes communism and socialism. The term fascism, came from the Roman fasces, which they used to carry in front of celebrations and marches and things, which has an axe with a number of sticks bundled around it. Now, I knew that, but I didn't know what the sticks meant. That they're bound together makes them stronger.
Not to be confused with feces, by the way.
I just thought it was interesting that, because I'd heard of it and I knew, well, okay, I can understand the axe, but what are the bits of wood for? There you go. It's because it's all for one and one for all. Now, he was very much a poster boy. He was at Winchester College, which is where Richie Sunak went to school, interestingly.
Hooray!
Yeah. And he was a fencing champion. It was thought if he'd not been injured in the First World War, it's quite likely he could have won the World Fencing Championship. He was so good. Now, it's interesting that when I searched for this, Amazon came up with that advert on the right-hand side. Can you see it? Shop black uniform shirt at amazon.co.uk. So he was very much a poster boy, very, very much seen as the coming man, as a spokesman for his particular generation. As you can see, there was never a shortage of photographs of him. He was using social media at the time very well, and there are just hundreds of photos of him. This was him in the First World War. He was commissioned into the cavalry unit, the Queen's Lancers, and fought in France on the Western Front. He transferred to the Royal Flying Corps as a pilot and air observer, but whilst demonstrating in front of his mother and sister, crashed, which left him with a permanent limb, as well as a reputation for brave and somewhat reckless. Now, somewhat alarmingly, he had a limp in his right leg like I do. He went back to the trenches, though, after all that, and before it was fully healed, and he was in the Battle of Loos, 1915, and he passed out at his post from pain. So he was not without bravery, but eventually he ended up in desk jobs for the rest of the war. Here he is again, another picture, still with his smart little tash. My father had one of those as well. Not exactly Hitlerian, but a sort of little moustache. Very popular, I think, in men of a certain age. So he was elected to Parliament as a Conservative MP in 1918. His maiden speech was an attack on Winston Churchill for having two jobs. He was very keen on feminism, so he was seen as forward-thinking and modern. He set himself up as a spokesman in Britain for the younger generation. This is what he said, very much in his kind of words. Beware, lest old age steal back and rob you of your reward. Lest old and dead men with their old dead minds embarbed in the tombs of the past creep back to dominate your new age, cleansed in the blood of your generation. So he was always a bit grandiose in the way he spoke. But he was elected as a Conservative MP, but crossed the floor to join the Labour Party in 1920. Does anybody know why he moved over from Conservatives? Because he was opposed to the use of the black and tans, the auxiliaries in Ireland. He was against the use, ironically, of paramilitaries. He spent some time as an independent, but then joined the Labour Party and served in various posts in Labour governments. He was actually very big in the Labour Party at the time. He went to a Labour Party meeting with 2,000 people at it, where the crowd of Labour supporters sang, "For he's a jolly good fellow." A lady in furs and elegant lady got up to give a speech at the introduction, and a whisper went round it was Lady Cynthia, Lord Curzon's daughter. They loved it. So the sparkle of royalty and of the upper class still hit home in Labour, as it, to a certain extent, I think it still does today. But in 1925, he'd written a book called Revolution by Reason and Other Essays. He foreshadowed Keynesian philosophy of demand management. Employment at that time in 1930 was running at up to 16% of the workforce, much higher than America. So when the Depression came in, it was really no change in Britain. They were already in depression. He also went on to write a bit later something called the Mosley Memorandum, in which he wanted an inner cabinet of experts from industry and economics professors and businessmen, run by John Maynard Keynes, who he got on very well with. He'd originally stood against Neville Chamberlain in the general election in October 24, which was announced after 3 recounts, and Chamberlain only won by 77 votes. Oswald Mosley was standing as a Labour candidate. It was greeted by uproar and fighting in the public gallery of Birmingham Town Hall, but he didn't make it, but he very close came to toppling Neville Chamberlain. He was very close to the miners, very close to the miners' leader. He went on to the United States and goes fishing with Franklin D. Roosevelt. And he wanted to pick up ideas from him. He was very impressed by that. He formed the New Party, not very original title, after leaving Labour. They weren't agreeing with his policy, but it failed to win any seats in the 1931 election, though it had the support initially of politicians like Aneurin Bevan from Labour and Harold Macmillan from the Conservatives. And it was very much against the corrupt old men like Lloyd George who were running the country. Beginning in 1932, he went to Italy, and there he is pictured with Benito Mussolini. He absolutely fell in love with Mussolini with what was going on there. They showed him around. They said, look at all these public works. I think it was said of Mussolini, at least he got the trains to run on time. Fascists were very much interested in state intervention, but state intervention where they were the only party and no others were allowed to exist. He'd also met up with Diane Mitford at that time, who was one of the famous Mitford sisters. He founded the British Union of Fascists, drawing inspiration from Mussolini and from much more from Mussolini than Hitler in the first place. And it's only then he started to promote anti-Semitism and anti-communism. There was a rump Labour government initially led by Ramsay MacDonald, which got into bed with the Conservatives, Stanley Baldwin's, and some of the Liberal Party, and formed the national government. They went to the country in October 31, and led by Baldwin, they won. The new party just got 0.2% of the vote. So that's not very successful on this part. If you do a search for Mosley, those are the sort of photos you come up with. You can see he was very much a popular figure. What about his
various? He either looks like Charlie Chaplin or Enoch Powell.
Very much so. But I also thought this. Look at who I put a picture on the right-hand side. Does anybody recognise him?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Russell Brand. Their attitude to women and their notoriety for romantic scandals was very much the case with Mosley. He married his mistress, Dinah Mitford. They had 2 sons together, and he had numerous affairs before and during his marriages, which were carried very much so by the British press at the time, but didn't seem to harm him too much. This is Dinah Mitford, seen as the most glamorous of the Mitford sisters. Got married to her. They secretly married in October 1936 in the drawing room of Joseph Goebbels in Germany, and attended by Adolf Hitler, amongst others. They kept the marriage secret until the birth of their first child in 1938. A year later, over lunch, Hitler told Diana that war was inevitable. So this was seen as a big advantage to him, having both the money and the glamour of marrying a Mitford girl. But also there was a lot of opposition going on. There was the Battle of Cable Street, which was but it was very much attacked by the Jewish community and by those who've been involved in the Spanish Civil War and their famous motto from that, no passera, they shall not pass. And there's supposed to have been about 100,000 on the street or something, and they didn't get through. Wonderful photo here, which seems to have been touched up a bit. I went to see Mosley. I was a bit puzzled by what was going on. He got up to speak. He got shouted at. He lasted for a few minutes, and then he went. And that was that. I didn't even know why he was there. In fact, the reason he was there was because there was a Moss Side by-election coming up. The Moss Side black community had grown to about 10,000. So it was dominating the agenda of this by-election. But there's his leaflet on the left, and he's pictured with his agent, Max Mosley, who was, of course, Oswald's son. And it was a very contentious, race-led campaign. Max Mosley, in the leaflet, pledged to stop coloured immigration, which he claimed threatened your children's health, which is a rather odd way of putting it. It re-emerged, this leaflet, when he got big into motorsport, and there was some controversy going on. Do you remember that, Max Mosley, motorsport? But winning a socially mixed constituency, which weirdly got as far as from Chorlton through to Moss Side to Central Manchester, was a very big constituency. We used to have a Tory MP until fairly recent times, actually. So they stood, and he hoped to win it because it thought it'd give him some credibility, as his supporters were still mainly seen as street fighting thugs. Almost 30 years before this election, Mosley had also targeted Manchester for the northern arm of his British Union of Fascists. It expanded in Greater Manchester, had 18 branches in the city and surrounding towns such as Rochdale, despite strong opposition by left-wing groups and Jewish communities. In fact, in 1933, one of his meetings at the Free Trade Hall was the scene of riots, and there was a notorious rally at Bellevue in September 34, where, according to Searchlight magazine, 3,000 anti-fascist campaigners marched along Hyde Road to protest against Bellevue. So it's got history with Manchester. So he tried to make himself heard in the Moss Side, and there were sort of down with black shirt thugs and various things was heard. That was him on the streets of Manchester in 1934. A very typical photo, that one on the right, isn't it? It didn't trying to look sort of Hitlerite. It didn't work at all. It didn't get that. There were these branches, as I said, they were included a list of infamy: Stretford, Altrincham, Ashton-under-Lyme, Hume, Rusholme, Withington, Blakely, Oldham, Bolton, Bury, and Rochdale all had fascist branches. They used to do things like chalk slogans in Fallowfield saying, "Christians awake, don't be slaughtered for Jewish finance." And it also prepared for the general election of 1940, which was never held due to World War II. The British Union of Fascists had also been declared illegal in 1937. But one of the staff from his northern branch in Higher Broughton stood as a candidate in their by-election in 1940, winning 418 votes against the Conservatives' 32,000. According to MI5 files on Mosley was being tracked in Manchester, including a secret meeting in 1940 in a curtained-off booth in a restaurant called the Victoria Grill. But the day after the by-election, Mosley and other British Union of Fascist leaders were arrested in London, and the party collapsed. He was also interred during the war, but he seemed to get off quite lightly because he became famous after the war too. I just Googled to see if there was anything going on at the moment about this, and this came up. It's a new British Union. It's been well over 70 years since Sir Oswald Mosley spoke these words, but it's astonishing how relevant his rhetoric has become.
I read up a bit on the Mitfords because I used to like Nancy Mitford's books. Yeah. And he and Mosley and Diana went to live in Paris, where they were quite good friends with the abdicated Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson, with whom they seemed to share a certain sympathy. It's quite
not surprising, that, is it? No. There's a pattern in it all. There's a pattern in it all. But I was interested when he became a Labour MP and was extremely popular at the time as well. And also the way in which his policy actually fitted in to certain forms of left-wing rhetoric. There's nothing wrong with that, because it was about spending more by the state to improve infrastructure and so on, which is, I think, very much a cry going on today. The difference being, of course, that fascists were keen to get into power in order to destroy democracy.
Yeah, I remember my family talking about the black shirts, when they were growing up in their 30s, and with nothing but contempt. But you have the, I don't know, with by-election somewhere where they got 400 votes as opposed to thousands and thousands, which shows how much they were really supported. But by flag waving, making a lot of noise, they seem bigger than they actually were. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, but there were all these branches that were set up in the fascists. They were bigger than you think. But the interesting is, why did it not take off here? There seem to be the very similar conditions. I mean, the alarming thing is that democracy can be used by, well, it has been used by left-wing ones as well, but mainly extreme right-wingers in order to destroy democracy. That if you can get a majority vote, you then get rid of the voting.